And without further ado, Mark, please tell us something more. What is media love?
And hi, Carolina, hi, Anna, hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, for having us, for being online. I know we're all inundated with these Zoom, Teams, and whatever sessions, both live and in postponed viewing context. So I really appreciate everybody checking this out. And I would encourage, not just because we love Carolina, but I would encourage everyone to stick with it this entire seminar, this entire summer of love. The lineup for the upcoming weeks and months is truly phenomenal. I'll be there every single time. So making notes for my book. So and what I prepared for today is, as you said, Carolina, I mean, I had the privilege of writing 2 books for Polity Press, one called Media Life, the other Media Work. And, as a true fan of Peter Jackson, I always wondered what the third one would be, right? You have to have a trilogy. And so it was kind of obvious that the third one should be about love, and the most fundamental of all human emotions and experiences. But like you, Carolina, I had no idea. Where do you start? Where do you begin? And I started collecting books about love. I mean, if you go to my apartment in Amsterdam, you come and visit me, you go to the hallway and there's my bookshelves, and it's just books with love in the title, which is kind of creepy. But and then only recently I actually found out that love is its own discipline. Love studies. I honestly did not know that, and I've learned a great deal from diving into that literature. And of course, since the last 5 to 10 years or so in media studies, our field, we are beginning carefully to explore this terrain as well. So generally buried under all kinds of rather difficult, oblique concepts like affect or something like that, right? We can't say love. I mean, affect sounds a bit more intense. But so yeah, so there is this thing that is bubbling up in all kinds of different ways. And what I want to do is I prepared a little slideshow with some interesting, I hope, images. I'm going to talk through that for about 15 to 20 minutes or so. And please, this is a conversation starter. I don't have a definition, sort of like this is what it is and this is how it's going to be. I'm exploring this. I'm here to learn, very much so. And in general, you could argue that what I'm presenting to you is at the moment what I think will be in my book. I'm only at the start of it. I'm currently writing 2 books, as you said, Carolina. The reason for that is, this is true. The week that the lockdown started in the Netherlands, my band was booked to go into the studio to record a new album. And so we haven't been able to do it yet. So yeah, I mean, otherwise we would have been on tour and I would have no time for books because it would be, festivals and drugs and groupies and everything. But no, I have to write books. But anyways, no, of course, nobody would listen, and that's fine too. We're just a bunch of old friends having a lot of fun, making lots of noise. Okay, right. I'll share my screen and please stop me at some point too, because that's I generally speak to it. I hope you can all see my slides. Yeah, great. Okay, so oh, by the way, most of the images you'll see in the background are images taken by a very dear friend of mine, Piet Hermans, who's a photographer, who will also supply the photography for my new book with MIT Press, Life and Media. So I'm really excited about that. I want to talk about media love, all the different ways in which we love media, and the different ways and different roles that media play in our love life. And of course, love can be romantic love, it can be desire or lust, it can be love, as a form of care or compassion, it could be love for the world. But so love in the widest possible sense of the word. Love as a collection of obviously quite profound human emotions. that are projected onto our media, our devices or characters in the media, as well as manifested through our use of media. And so I just wanted to explore all the different ways we encounter love in these instances. In a way, this entire summer of love is you could say, is sort of a mapping exercise. At least that's how I would look at it. And for me, it's really interesting because, like I said earlier, love is often, when it is discussed in studies of media or about media, it is considered a problem, leading to fabulous forms of art that try to warn us against the fact that we've become way too enamored with our devices, that we are sucked in to media, that we become like machines, you know, that we don't have affect anymore because we are mediated all the time, or that we are addicted, you know, to porn, to smartphones, to games, that we develop all kinds of disorders. Or even if we are positive about love and media, then it's immediately extreme, like in the studies of fans and fandom. We finally acknowledge the love that somebody has for media or for a character in media, but then immediately jump off the cliff to the other extreme of fanatics. But sort of the everyday, mundane, sort of very grounded sort of experience of love we all have constantly in different ways. It's sometimes difficult to touch, difficult to acknowledge. And also love as a very positive notion. Love something, I mean, one of the things that I've really learned from studying love studies, as the field is called, is to consider love as an opportunity to care about more than just yourself or, let's say, one other partner, but to care about the world and to try to do something about it. And from that perspective, love actually is very transformative, very powerful, very positive. So how can we dig into that everydayness of love in media? I'm going to skip forward to the sort of taxonomy I use in my work and in the book to unpack this question of how do we love our media and what role do media play in our love. And I'll look at media on 3 different levels. First, on the level, you could say a micro level of media as practice, a tried and tested approach in media studies where we primarily look at media in terms of what people are actually doing with media, how that makes them feel, and what that practice means to them. And on a second level, on a, you could say, meso level of analysis, I look at the mediation of love. And this is a form of analysis became popularized in the 1980s and 90s, in particular, both in the West as well as in Latin America, for example, through the work of Jesus Martin Barbero, where we were looking at how media, when they play a role in the way we make sense of love and how we talk about love and everything, also transform love and our understandings of love and make us look differently at media, at each other through media, and so on and so forth. And on a third, perhaps more macro level, I'm using mediatization theory, a more recent intervention in our field, you could argue, to look at, to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Like, what if we take all the media into consideration, can we say of how our ideas about media and love are changing? What is actually happening on the broader scale, on the bigger picture? So those are the 3 analytical steps that I briefly want to explore in this talk, and hopefully more in depth in the book. And I'm very open to any kind of questions or interventions on your part, like say, hey, Mark, you should think about this or that. So let's look at what people are actually doing with love. And let's get the 800-pound gorilla in the room out of the way, pornography. Because that's also when I talk about this with my students, that's almost the first thing they go to, right? Oh, love and media. Yeah, people use the internet is about porn. You know, the famous song that was published a couple of years ago. And immediately the next step is a normative debate. This is good. No, 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 no. This is bad. And then we start talking about exploitation and about shame and about all kinds of horrible things, generally speaking. And this is exactly what the study of love teaches us we should prevent and should move beyond. These tired binaries of good versus bad, and that sort of keep us locked in. I mean, since 2014, we don't just have a discipline of love studies. That's when an essay called Love Studies was published first. But we also have a journal of porn studies. And what that journal teaches us, and what that journal advocates and celebrates, is in fact the enormous and ever-expanding variety and complexity of sex, sexuality, sexual identifications that people all over the world experience in and through media, in part enabled through pornography. And that complexity is much more interesting, and intellectually also much more interesting than the simple binary of good versus bad. So enough said about porn. What do people actually do when it comes to love and media? And of course, you could look at how people use media to find love and to keep love. And then we look at, for example, online dating. An enormous industry that used to be kind of like weird, and now it's so incredibly common. It's actually weird if you didn't meet each other on some kind of dating platform. Dating is an incredibly interesting industry because you could argue it's one of the only industries where a happy customer is very bad for business, which introduces a really interesting paradoxical sort of conundrum in our analyses of this industry. It is also an industry that on the one hand makes love easier and more complicated at the same time, right? It's easier because, anything is available all the time, right? You don't have to wait until the disco open or the club, as Carolina said in the introduction. It's 24/7 party, and not just on one app, but on thousands of them. But it becomes more difficult because is the person you're matched with, is that on the basis of what is that exactly? Is that attraction, or is it the algorithm that you were matched? And ultimately, you still have to meet this stranger and fall in love. So it's fun. Sexting is another lovely way of looking at media and love as a practice. Sexting, which again often invokes normative debates, people conjuring up horrible examples of sexting going wrong, which thankfully is extremely rare. The vast majority of sexting is incredibly healthy, and this is what is so important, I think, about looking at media through the lens of love. It makes us aware that it's so much fun. Sometimes we forget that. Like, I don't know how many books of media I have to read, and there's not a single mention in an entire book about how much fun all of this is. That we love media, that a movie that we just saw, a song we just heard, just brings so much joy. And that should be the starting point for anything that we try to make sense of. And of course it is, but we sometimes don't articulate it. And I think by doing so, we get closer to, dare I say it, truth. Dating and sexting, online dating and sexting comes with regrettable side effects, like men thinking it's a really good idea to send pics of their dicks to prospective romantic partners. Luckily, we have fabulous artists that turn that into traveling shows. I don't know if you know this, look it up online, it's hilarious. The artist who made an entire installation of all the pictures of dicks that she received when she participated in online dating. It's fabulous. Other practices that we can think of that make me smile: after sex selfies. They have their own hashtag, which are absolutely beautiful. Teledildonics is this fabulous industry that got a bit of a hype in the 1990s and now have become incredibly mundane. And of course, when teledildonics, the first devices were invented that would enable people to have sex with each other through a remote connection. I mean, the first patent was filed in 1978. But the idea behind it was not that we would have sex with machines, but that machines and media would enable us to have sex with each other. It's just one more way in which romantic couples close down the space between them. And that is the primary function that media play in their life. Sexting is another example of this. Up until the introduction of sex robots. Harmony was the first model like that, introduced in 2018 by Realbotics, an American company. There's also a male version. Later on in this Summer of Love, there will be a presentation by Belinda Middleweek, very dear friend and colleague from the University of Technology in Sydney, who's done research on male users of robots and finds an incredibly complicated, very nuanced kind of community and ways of making sense of partnership and courtship in this area. Not at all gravitating towards the fears that many people have or had about sex robots, for example, as exemplified by the worldwide campaign against them. Mm-hmm. So when we look at practice, we see this wide variety of engagement between people and their media to keep love, to make love more complex, more interesting, to close down spaces. And of course, in various ways also to open them back up again, because how do we feel about all these devices in between us and our love? When we look at mediation, so we take it up a notch and we look more on the sort of emerging complex relationships between us and our media in society and how that changes over time. I want to go back to a quote in the 1992 book by Anthony Giddens on the transformation of intimacy, where he says that the rise of romantic love, in other words, where we started thinking of romantic love as something that would be possible and perhaps even necessary for people to be together. And this started happening in about the 17th and 18th century. I mean, the idea of romantic love is actually relatively new in many different ways. That idea got hold at the same time that the romantic novel came about and was introduced, suggesting a direct parallel between what we think about how we feel in terms of love and the evolution of our media. That the two cannot be separated, even though Professor Giddens is not a media scholar, making a profound mediation argument here. And it is interesting that when we look at the romance novel, it is perhaps the most under-researched form of media in media studies. It hardly gets any serious attention, presentations. I mean, there are academic journals about romance fiction and so on and so forth, but they're often delegated to the side, often not even part of media studies, even though it's such an incredibly rich and arguably one of the most powerful forms of media on the planet, if anything, because it's the most popular form of media on the planet. And not just a romance novel, but what about the soap opera? And it has different names in different parts of the world, but it exists literally in every culture, in every continent, as the most popular form of media by far, which again is fascinating. But beyond the versions of love and media that are presented to us, I wanted to very briefly mention, because I know I will be running out of time soon, a project that I've been doing, not for the Media Love book, but just because I thought it would be fun. Since 2011, I've been teaching in one form or another since the late 1990s at various universities around the world, a course that led ultimately to the book Media Life, sorry. And it's sort of an introduction course for graduate and undergraduate students in media, society, and everyday life. And one of the things I ask students to do in that course, I mean, this course generally has about between 400 and 800 students, depending on where I teach it. And the students are literally coming from all over the world. And as a voluntary assignment, students don't get credit for this. It's not graded in any shape or form. I'm just ask them if they feel like doing it. I ask students to upload to this blog online, Why I Heart My Media. You can find it online. It's an open website. A story about their feelings about media, specifically why they love media. They can also say if they hate it. Love is not one emotion, it's a whole bundle of emotions. And over the years, hundreds and hundreds of students have added stories, sometimes just one line, sometimes a meme, sometimes a link to a YouTube video, sometimes a long personal story. And if you analyze these narratives, these stories about, and it's interesting, right? Most of the research in this way is done about the opposite. Why do people are addicted to media? And you get stories like that, but this is the exact opposite. From all this work, I have found at least 4 reasons why people love media so much. And if we consider these 4 reasons, it becomes actually quite understandable why, for one thing, media plays such a profound role in our lives, and secondly, why we love that so much. And of course, like all love, that relationship is not uncomplicated, nor is it unproblematic, but it's very much there, and therefore very much weird that we haven't spent more time and attention to it. First of all, in the background, you see a picture of a class that I taught at Indiana University, where I worked for 8 years. And the snippets are quotes from the blog. You don't have to read it. But the 4 key elements include, first of all, where people say, I love media because I can tell my story. I can express myself. I can make media, I can vent, I can tell people who I really am, I can share in more ways than I can do without media. So self-expression is a key motivation for love, obviously. The second one has to do with belonging. The notion that through media, we stay in touch with family and friends. We know where we are, where we're going. It grounds us. This notion of community and belonging and of identity are 2 very fundamental reasons why we love media, right? We never feel alone because of media. And then when we ask students to not use media for a day or a week and then report back on it, we are stunned that they express symptoms of addiction. Well, obviously, we just asked them to take away that what gives them a sense of belonging and community and identity. Obviously, that feels horrible. I don't think that's evidence of addiction. It's just evidence of being a normal human being, that those things are important to you. And finally, this is a long story that you shouldn't read, really. I'll go back to this one, is that a lot of students in my classes, when they write on this blog, talk about how they sometimes are overwhelmed with really strong feelings of love, or of hate, of anger, of joy, of intense feelings that you don't feel comfortable, or you feel unsafe expressing face to face, or in wherever you're staying or living or working or going to school. And then media allows you to do this. So media is actually something that empowers and enables having and expressing strong feelings rather than thwarting them or suppressing them. So these are fundamental reasons why it is easy to understand why we love media so much, and media plays such a profound role in love. I'm going to conclude now with an incredibly far-fetched argument, and that's why I'm going to rush through it in 2 minutes. I'm sorry, Caroline, I hope you forgive me for taking that time, because it's a macro argument. The picture you're seeing is actually of a tunnel of love, which is in the Vondelpark in downtown Amsterdam, the city where I also live. So in mediatization theory, we look at the macro perspective. Like, I mean, how is society and its institutions as a whole affected by this sort of the shift that we're identifying, in this case, the shift of this trend of us loving our media and media playing a role in our love lives. And I want to use this concept to speak more, I would say, literally about media love, as in the love that we have for our media as devices, as materiality, the materiality of media, the stuff of our media, because something I think really interesting has been happening that we can see that is documented in our media texts. Consider, for example, our love for and with media in film. Some of you may know the film Barbarella from 1968, where Jane Fonda is put into a device in an excessive machine intended to kill her, but she proceeds to have sex with the device and then, of course, surviving, to the big frustration of her torturer. But still, the device here is something intending to kill us. About 10 years later, Woody Allen made the movie Sleeper, about a society where people have sex in devices called orgasmatrons. They look like elevator shafts that you go into, spend about 5 seconds and come out, and they take away all the messiness of sex. It still requires 2 people in that space, and they still get orgasms, but part of it is outsourced to a device. It's a cold, machine-like future that Woody tells us about in this film, and he advocates throughout the film, you know, the messiness of real human relationships. Fast forward about 20 years, we get into the 1990s. There's a movie called Demolition Man with Sandra Bullock and Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes, in which just people in that society don't have sex with each other anymore. They have sex with electronic devices that you put into your head because they don't want, as Sandra Bullock says in the movie, fluid transfer. Which is something Sylvester Stallone, who's a man from the past, defrosted in the future, just simply doesn't get. But again, this sort of like sex, but perfectly okay to have sex through a device. And now we're coming into our time, and we see Oscar-winning movies like Her, where somebody falls in love with a computer operating system and has sex with it in the film, if you remember. And this time, the machine is not out to kill us. It actually is an incredibly warm, caring. I mean, you can't help. I mean, partly because of the fabulous performance of Scarlett Johansson as the computer, and Joaquin Phoenix, of course, as the main actor. But still, it's an incredibly warm-blooded film about somebody having sex with a computer. A year later, we had Ex Machina, where we felt really warm and caring about a beautiful young woman who was a robot, but enslaved behind closed doors. And because somebody fell in love with her, he set her free. So that's an interesting evolution of us having sex and falling in love with machines, from machines that are out to kill us to machines that we've fallen in love with and want to set free. You see the same trend in literature, starting from the 17th century with Hoffman's amazing story, The Sandman, about a man falling in love with an automaton and not wanting to hear the advice of his friends, saying, dude, your wife is a robot. And okay, they didn't say dude in the 17th century, but you'll forgive me. And then in the end, when he actually realizes she is an automaton, he commits suicide because it's just too scary to comprehend. And then we go to the 70s, and we have this beautiful short story, Super Toys Last All Summer Long, which later on got acquired by Stanley Kubrick and then taken up by Steven Spielberg to turn into the movie AI, about when the society can't have kids, they replace children with artificial children, who then get dumped when they get permission to actually conceive a real child. In the novel, this is a harrowing story. In the movie, in the end, we are made to feel sorry for the robot that gets discarded at the end in favor of a real human being, which is an interesting emotional shift. Michel Houellebecq, in The Possibility of an Island, talks about, you know, that the only true joy in society is having sex, but that's a kind of an empty experience. So he clones himself and finds peace and joy in sort of the emptiness of life as a clone. And then in this year's book by Kazuo Ishiguro, a Nobel Prize-winning author, Clara and the Sun, it's about children that are being kept companion by artificial friends, written from the perspective of the artificial friend. So I see again this development of machines and technologies through which we experience love as scary, full of horror, and even out to kill us, to a contemporary articulation of love and sex through machines that is actually warm, empathic from the perspective of the device itself. I could go on and on by looking at television. The Cylons in the 1970s were cold, heartless, cybernetic organism intending to kill us. Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator, the Borg in Star Trek. But what were the recent iteration of Battlestar Galactica in 2004? Cylon was a gorgeous, warm-blooded woman that had relationships. 7 of 9 was a Borg that fell in love and had and people fell in love with her. So again, we see that same kind of interesting development where our intimacy with devices and machines and media has crossed a certain threshold. And I think now, and this is my last point for today, I'm sorry for running over time. Why all of this excites me so much, makes me happy. Beyond that, it's such a fertile ground for research and for thinking through all these things, is that the study of love and the study of media today share a really interesting property. I'm quoting Anna Malinowska, who introduced the field of love studies. And she says, she argues that love is clearly significant as a transformative power sui generis in social love. In other words, through love, we can make a world, perhaps even a better world. Now, what do we know about media and media studies? We know that when people use media, this can have the effect of creating new social worlds, which we call the worlding effects of media practices. This is a quote from John Postel from a debate on media anthropology earlier this year. And this is the true, I think, power of looking at media and love when we make sense of the world today, is that they both carry the promise of transformation, of giving us agency to make a world, rather than to consume one or to just adapt to one or to accept that this is the one that we're living in. No, 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 no. Through media and love, we can create a world. I mean, we consistently do. The simple act of using media is world making. The simple act of loving is world making. So that opens up the specter of the question. So, okay, great. So now we have this power. What are we going to do with it? And I think this Summer of Love will give us a lot of answers. And thanks again, Carolina, for allowing me to ramble on a bit about all of this.
Thank you.